Hey, this is Dominic, and this is your home for the cutting-edge conversations on optimizing your personal performance, lighting up your sex life, and living a purpose-driven life of your own design.
These are the topics that Dominic and I have both struggled with in our own lives and still don't always get right. This is Brian. Welcome to the Great Man Podcast.
I love this quote from Blaise Pascal. All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. What is it that's so uncomfortable about sitting quietly in a room alone? How about the rampage of thoughts that are running through our minds that won't leave us alone? Think about it. What do we do when we want to punish our worst societal offenders? We lock them up and put them in solitary, where they have no escape from themselves or their thoughts. You know, Harvard professor Dan Gilbert ran a fascinating experiment with some of his college students that reinforced this experience. He took a group of students, put them in a room for multiple hours with absolutely nothing for them to do, and he stripped them from all forms of stimulation. No phones, nothing to read or write with, nothing to watch on TV. This situation became so uncomfortable for many of his students that many of them elected to receive minor but uncomfortable shock treatments because that shock somehow represented an upgrade from the discomfort they were experiencing internally. What does this say about the state of our internal being and the thoughts that we have that create that level of discomfort where the upgrade is being shocked? All of this evidence points to a need to work much more effectively with our thoughts and the cascade effect that those thoughts have on our internal well-being and the emotions. So who better to come teach us about how to work with our thoughts than one of my closest friends and mindfulness expert, Cory Muscara. Now, who is Cory? If you don't know him, Cory is a renowned mindfulness teacher, and he's the co-founder of Mindfulness.com. His meditations have been heard over 20 million times in over 100 different countries. He's the author of best-selling book, Stop Missing Your Life. He's lived as a monk in Burma, where he spent 6 months in complete silence. That was his initiation into the deeper layers of meditation, was to go 6 months in Burma, shaving the head, wearing the cloth, sleeping on a mat that was so thin you could pinch it, feel the bones in your fingers for 6 months. And he's also picked up about 175,000 new Instagram followers since his last appearance on the show. So Cory's message is getting out there, it's rising, and his education efforts are profound. Many of you guys in the community have already worked deeply with Cory. So in this episode, he's going to teach you how to step outside of your mind when it's rampaging. He's going to give you some compassionate and practical ways to work with an agitated mind, practical techniques to work with scary feelings that you may get absorbed with, but how to stop that and to step back from it. And he also gives you a very simple 2-word mantra to calm your freaked out mind. Now, Cory teaches many live masterclasses, and by far his most popular topic is this one, working with thoughts. So you're getting a taste of that today. And if you're really vibing with this and want to do a deeper dive, Cory has graciously offered a 50% discount on his 90-minute masterclass on working with thoughts. There's a link in the show notes that gives you a 50% off discount code. The masterclass is typically $50. You're able to get it for only $25. That link is at the top of the show notes. I will also remind you at the end of this episode. So if you've gotten a taste and you want to go deeper, that is available to you. So enjoy the third and final installment of our Mindfulness for Men series, Working with Thoughts. And here, starting the conversation, is Cory Muscara.
The main thing I want to explore is just that I think is relevant to a lot of people, anyone with a mind, is how to work with the thinking mind. In my teachings over the years, this topic has been the most popular that's arisen, specifically just working with thoughts, parentheses, especially the difficult ones that it seems across the board that everyone can resonate with. And I think for a lot of people, it's a conscious realization of like, I'm completely overwhelmed by my thoughts, so I don't know how to work with them in different contexts. I think for a lot of other people, it's more of a subconscious struggle. I feel like something is off. I'm experiencing anxiety, and there's not necessarily a recognition that it is related to the thinking mind. And a big recognition and realization for me, and especially in the early days of my meditation practice, is how much my thinking mind has power over me, mainly when I'm not aware of it. So it's an opportunity for us to just look at that through a few different lenses, because working with thoughts is not just as simple as redirect your attention and focus on your breath. That is one strategy, but in the same way that Tiger Woods doesn't become Tiger Woods by just practicing hitting driver off the tee. He's hitting all different shots, sand shots, long iron shots, mid irons, putts. Like all of that goes into being an effective golfer. To be effective at working with the mind requires a lot of different approaches and strategies. The first place I want to start that I think is frighteningly overlooked, or I would even say tragically overlooked, in that there's a lot of opportunity in this first inquiry, is that having an overactive mind or negative thoughts or just an agitated thinking mind is not necessarily an indication that your mind is broken or that you're doing something wrong. In fact, I would argue that that is on the further down the spectrum of things to explore in terms of why your mind might be doing what it's doing. And yet it's often the first thing that people go to. And therefore the approach is often like, oh, my mind's all over the place. I must have ADD or ADHD, which can be true. But I just need to learn to focus better. I just need to bring my attention back to the present moment. And that's where you get this aggressive type of meditation where it's back to the breath, back to the breath, back to the breath. And you try to suppress and even submit yourself into obedience. And I have very little interest in that from a personal growth perspective and from a spiritual perspective, because I just think it's deeply limited in terms of the inquiry you can have around where are these thoughts coming from and how might they trouble you into a deeper conversation with your soul. And so the first thing to say around this is that in my experience personally and as a teacher, for many people, an activated mind is an indication of something that is out of alignment. Negative thoughts, attention that is ping-ponging from one place to another is often an indication that you are not connecting to and living in alignment with a deeper truth that is arising within you. The very easy way to see the truth of that sentiment is just to think about any time where maybe you did something in the day that was like a white lie or a more overt lie, or you said something that felt off, that didn't feel like you, and it wasn't really resolved. And then you went to bed that evening and the mind just couldn't stop thinking about it. Just ruminating, you feel the anxiety of it, and it's just going on in loops. Does that mean that your mind isn't well trained? No. It means that something happened that's unresolved in the system. You could, if you want to put energetic terms on it, you could say there's a stuck energy in the system. That's one manifestation of it is agitation in the thinking mind. If you drop beneath that, you're going to see agitation on a lot of different levels. But the reason this is important is because the one that we tend to focus on is just my thoughts all over the place. And if you just try to force that back to be present, well, then you don't even get to look at, in this case, what's beneath that. I had this conversation with my parent and something just felt off. I felt like I was in a reactive state. I was triggered, and I love them dearly, and I don't feel like that got to be communicated. If it's just I have negative thoughts or anxious attention, focus back on the breath, right? It's there's lost territory to explore there. And that's a benign example. I think a more significant one that I'm sure a lot of people will resonate here is when you've made life decisions that have been more out of what we could call conditioning or the ego mind, which is essentially a set of beliefs about who you need to be in the world and what you need to do in order to be okay or safe or get love or be praised. This can cause us to get into certain relationships that don't necessarily feel right, but objectively, everyone's like, this person's great. Why not just go for them? And you're like, okay, I guess that makes sense, but like something's off. Or you go into a job that you were told your whole life would be the thing that is, your refuge and is going to make you happy. And it's just like, it was more a pattern, a script of mind that got you there rather than an alignment. And you could get deep in that. You could go years playing out that psychological conditioned script, and something deep down that we often, like as a form of survival, have to disconnect us from because it's too painful to actually acknowledge that something's aligned. So we don't always consciously recognize this, but it's still, there is something deep beneath the surface. We could say at the soul of our being that knows what we're doing is off. And that we're just like operating on this mental level of what to do next. When something is off on that deep level, there's tension, there's contraction. It can show up in the body. It can show up as fear. It can show up as anxiety. And it can show up as difficult thoughts, annoying thoughts, agitating thoughts, or just a sense of like, I'm always buzzing. Why does that happen? One reason is that the agitation and the busyness is a form of protection against the stillness that is more vulnerable and would actually invite you into a conversation with your soul. Dom, I know you talked about this, or I've heard you talk about this over the years when we used to do speaking engagements in corporate, just like this addiction to being busy that many people experience. And I think many high-performing men experience in particular. So it's like the thing that we're condemning, it's like, I hate being busy, I hate being busy, I hate being busy, is also the thing that we're subconsciously attached to, because staying busy, staying forward looking, staying like in this agitated, what's next, goal-oriented state keeps us from actually being still, relaxing, letting go. And what happens when we get still, relax, and let go? We feel the fullness of ourselves. And that's when, I'm using words like soul or heart, but put your own language on it, just like a deeper part of us starts to speak and that we start to feel. And every contemplative tradition is going to tell you some form of this, which is why like they all require slowing down, not reacting to all of the thoughts moving through your mind, like actually getting still enough where you can hear the different layers of you being expressed. And if those deeper ones that like you feel in your belly, or you could say like your dharmic script, like the life energy you've come into this world with that pulls you forward, that was the thing that had you exploring when you were a kid, or going like, I want to do that, or be an astronaut, or whatever that impulse is. If that has been like suppressed, it doesn't mean it goes away. It just gets put in a box, and that box is shaking in your system, and it's creating this agitation that will show up as tension in the body, and it will also show up as a mind that is agitated.
Cory, this masterclass that you teach is your most popular one. And you said right in the beginning that there's some people that recognize this on a subconscious level, and there's other people that recognize it fully. If we were to fast forward, somebody took your masterclass, they've been working on the exercises that I assume maybe are part of the masterclass, like, is this something that ever goes away? Is there an end game, right, in this? Or is it just we're dealing with this condition of being human a little bit better?
I like the last thing you said. Yeah, the end game, that's complicated territory to go into, because there are some schools of thought that, you start going into different spiritual traditions like Buddhism, that there is an end point. Nibbana, the English translation of that is nirvana, which is called cessation. The translation of that is cessation. And this is essentially where your identity is no longer the thoughts, the emotions, the sensations, the ego structure that has developed. And therefore you are connected to the spaciousness of awareness or spirit, soul, consciousness in such a way that what is moving through that awareness no longer sweeps you around. And they describe that as the end of suffering. Doesn't mean that thoughts go away or emotions go away. No, as long as you're in human form, that's like part of the deal. If you don't want to deal with the body, then wait to the next lifetime when you're an angel or some being of light, and maybe better luck there. But as long as we're in human form, this does come with the territory. So there's like the ultimate perspective that there could be some cessation. I think more, and that's me getting a little nerdy with spirituality. I think what's more relevant here, and like for me as well, is that, yeah, there is a reality that these thoughts are going to be a part of our life, probably for the rest of our life. Definitely for the rest of our life. The amount that we suffer around them and how we're able to make them an ally versus an enemy is something that we have a deep influence over. And yes, someone who goes to a masterclass like that is given the resources for how to work with that. In my experience, I will say, when sharing like results in terms of like what a person has gotten from their life, I do think it's important for people to know like what they've done, but also their background. Like I didn't have any real significant trauma. If I did, I think my journey with working with thoughts would be different, might take a little bit longer. I did struggle a lot with anxiety and depression when I was in high school. I come from a bit of an anxious brained family. So I have this disposition to a mind that can be a bit chaotic and self-judging. I played competitive golf in high school, and that's just one area where I remember like a lot of beating myself up when things didn't go well. And what I will say is after my meditation practice, which again, to be transparent, like what that looked like was 6 months of silent meditation practice. So I could never guarantee that this would be an outcome for someone after like a week of meditation. But that inner critic is not there. I don't have any charge around self-judgment at all. There are a few things that I would like say that about in terms of my personal growth, but that has left. Now, it doesn't mean that thoughts don't arise that say, Cory, you could do this better, or like, I think that was a mistake and we should go back. But the self-berating and the taking seriously of those thoughts as if like they're the voice of God coming in, casting shame on me, that's gone. And the journey toward that, if that's a continuum, what I do see for people that engage in meditation practices, but any sort of contemplative mind exploration practice, that is the case. And one of the key reasons that does start to happen is that with any practice where you are anchoring yourself in the seat of observation or the seat of awareness, you're changing how you experience the flow of experience that moves through your moment to moment life stream. And that is only going to be so many things. Again, in human form, there's only so many things you experience. There's seeing, if you have that capacity, hearing, sensation, smelling, touching, and I think I missed one. But then
smell?
What's that? Taste.
Was it smell?
Oh, there's taste. So you got smell. And then there's like thoughts and mental objects. And so that's your experience in every moment, whether it's a moment of deep grief or a moment of ecstasy. It's some conglomeration of all of that. And in meditation, what you're doing is just choosing to be still and to be the being that is observing all of this. And where suffering comes from is from the identification with those experiences as they arise, with even the thought, like a simple thought of like, I'm such an idiot. It is so easy for that thought to arise and for it to become, it's not an observation, it's here, it's behind. It's how we now look at our life. It's like, yeah, I'm an idiot. And it just paints, it filters everything that comes through. Just being able to do something very simply like, I'm an idiot. Oh, that's a thought. The more you do that, the more you're creating that separation and the more you're anchoring into the observer.
I would love your perspective on this, Cory, because I had a recent experience that I found it to be really challenging to sit as the observer. And I think that this would be probably really relevant to a lot of people. So I've shared on the podcast recently that I've been going through some undiagnosed physical condition that's got me at like 40% of my energy. My nervous system is jacked up. I constantly feel like I'm in a state of fight or flight. You know, I'll wake up in the morning with anxiety for no particular reason. A week ago, I have to fly to Los Angeles for a speech. And in the morning, I know I've got to leave for the airport early because I got to check a bag. And the airports have had long lines recently. So instead of leaving 2 hours early, I'm going to leave 2.5 hours early. I'm making all of the arrangements to get there on time. I call the Uber. It's going to be there in 4 minutes. It takes 20 minutes to get there. I feel the agitation kick in, right? I get into the car and the Four Sigmatic shot, you know, one of those mushroom shots that have a little bit of energy in it, was in my pocket. It had burst open in my pocket, so it's leaking everywhere. So that's happening. And now I'm trying to put on my headset so I can meditate in the cab to start to roll back some of this anxiety I feel creeping on. And my AirPods won't sync with my phone. Neither will my Bose noise canceling headset. And we are in standstill traffic. And the Uber estimated time of arrival is now within 45 minutes of the flight taking off, which means you can't check a bag because the federal law is 1 hour is the cutoff time. I'm going ballistic inside. Like, you would have thought that my house was burning down. I was losing like all the pictures that were irreplaceable. I closed my eyes and I was in this tornado of what if someone missed the flight and how do we get my bag there? And what do I tell to the client, for the dinner and all the things. And it's caving in on me. I could feel with the witnessing how irrational a lot of this was. Because the worst case scenario, Cory, was I was going to miss the dinner, not the speech, which was the next day. But it was a tsunami. And for about 45 minutes, I had to like calm down. Like, I had to keep my eyes closed, breathe, let go, surrender. But it just kept coming. It kept coming. What do we do when we're in that state where it's like, I'm trying to stay behind those thoughts. I'm trying to disconnect. And it's almost like that scene from Braveheart where like I'm sitting in my trench and I'm holding the spear, but the entire army is coming at me. And, Braveheart's like, hold. And I'm doing everything I can. It's just, they're all coming. What then?
Yeah, good. I love it. I think most people have been in some situation like that. So I'll start by sharing two things. The first is to acknowledge that the practice of anchoring in awareness, I view that as like a long-term development. I actually find that it's not as effective of a strategy like in the moment. I'm sure you're better at working with that than you were, before you went on your radical sabbatical and did 10 days of silence. And it's still activating in the system. I've noticed that as well. That like, just being able to go, it's just thoughts. Another part of my mind's like, yes, and real world consequences right here that I still can't do anything about. Two things I like to play with in those moments. The first is kind of related to this anchoring in awareness, but like with a different perspective, where I sort of imagine that like I am observing my human. Right. If we view it as like there's like this overall consciousness that's sort of like expressing itself through forms of being human, that awareness itself, our human has all different scripts and reactivities and like agendas and plans to reach the plane. I sort of sit back and I watch my human freaking out. And then I just say, of course. Like, of course you're freaking out. Of course you're scared. Of course you're frustrated right now. And I almost use that as a mantra, like, of course. And it's a way to just meet the reality of what's arising without adding more contraction. It's inherently a shitty situation. No one wants to be late for a plane. Is it going to ruin your life? You can talk yourself through that logically. No, but it's still frustrating. And so there's something about like stepping back from like the human that has all of these agenda items and just meeting it very lovingly, not trying to be like, stop freaking out and just going like, of course you're freaking out. Of course you're bummed. And I do this in relationship. I do this anytime I feel fear. I do this like maybe before stepping on a stage and there's a little bit of nervousness. I go, yeah, of course you are. And there's something perhaps counterintuitively that's very settling about that. So that's one thing I like to do. Another thing, and this potentially requires more of a spiritual orientation. But I remember after living as a monk, there was a big emphasis on karma. And not karma as like you did this and this bad thing is going to happen to you, but more like through the lens of like there's a cause and effect relationship with all of our actions. They're really hard to understand. It's never as simple as like did this bad thing. But I always did like to take the perspective that if something negative is happening, it's like the burning off of old karma, like anything that's accumulated in the past, even certain reactivities, like You can reactivities as a form of karmic accumulation where like bad things happen and I react in a certain way. It's like, oh, here that is again. Bad thing is happening. This reaction is coming up, cause and effect relationship in the mind. And if I can just watch that unfold, you can view the burning off of karma through two lenses. One, like a bad thing happened. It's like, oh, there it goes. Okay, so that's one more layer of like bad karma, so to speak, that's burning itself off. Cool. I'm a little bit cleaner. I'm a little bit more pure and spacious. And then from the mind perspective, if I can just watch the mind freaking out without fueling it, and that's the difference here, like fueling it, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're ruminating about it. It means that you're attached to it, you're identified with it, or you're contracted around it in some way. All of those are forms of fueling an anxious mind.
That's huge, Cory. That word you just said about fueling is so important, right? Like I can observe my mind freaking out. And that was the thing I was really proud of myself was I witnessed it. And because my immune system or my nervous system is compromised right now, it's perceiving this thing as way bigger than it actually is. And I was able to witness that versus in the past, I would have jumped right in on that. Yeah. And I would have fueled it and I would have participated in it. And I would have believed that it was as dire of situation that it was trying to convince me to be. And I didn't play that game. And eventually, like I was able to settle. And by the time I got to the airport, I was an entirely different human being. And I got there just on time, checked the bag, everything worked out. And it felt like you were saying, kind of like this burning off of an old way of being.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you guys, to go uber spiritual here, have you guys heard of a TV show called Big Mouth?
No.
So Big Mouth is an animated show on Netflix written by a couple of comedians, and it's centered around, I think, grade school kids coming into their sexuality, right? Like that's the general premise, and going through puberty and people liking each other, etc. But something they've done that's brilliant on this show is that they have outside fictional characters that come into these kids' lives, and they represent a certain part of their being, right? So one of the main characters is a hormone monster, right? And you can imagine kids going through puberty, they have a hormone monster, and they're the ones telling them to constantly masturbate or have sex or do whatever. But there's other characters, right? There's the shame wizard, and the shame wizard comes in and just starts like, of course you did this wrong. Of course it's your fault, and you brought this in. There's the anxiety mosquito, where it's like worst case scenario and catastrophizing. And so these kids are going through this show with these hormone monsters and shame wizards and anxiety and all these other characters kind of like as part of their life. And I just imagine, Dominic, as you're sitting there in the Uber on the way, like there's a choice. There's like, we can let the shame wizard come in and be like, yes, you did everything wrong. You should have left 3.5 hours early and everything else.
Right.
And ironically, what happens is in the show, when the kids get involved with the shame wizard or the hate worm, right? They start to take on more of that personality. I know it's fantastic. So many emotional characters, but they start to take it on. Right. Yeah. And so I think, like, Cory, what you're saying here is if Dominic's sitting in the Uber, sure, we could get it with the shame wizard and kind of get on his side. And it's like, yes, I should have done these things differently. Or we can say, of course, of course you're freaking out. Of course you've done these things. So that's a really, it's a helpful frame of a way to disengage, because it's so natural and easy to engage with all of those monsters and characters.
Yeah, well said. That show sounds amazing, by the way.
Right.
Yeah, and it's a counterintuitive way to disengage, because like the semantic paradox of things like disengage or letting go, like they imply that you have to move away from something, but often you first have to move closer to it to see the ways that you're holding on so that you can actually soften around it. And yeah, what you said just made me want to think of 3 different things. But the first, like, just continue on this thread of like, what do you do like in the taxi or in the Uber, and how do you work with that's arising? And one thing I've also been playing with lately is like when there is, I call them scary feelings. It could just be like anxiety, existential angst. I just say, hi, scary feelings. And then I say, what is one next step we can take? And it's incredibly simple. I think when applied, I found it incredibly powerful. And again, saying things like high scary feelings or like noting the thought, like calling it a thought, like there's so many ways to do this. But I found, this happened like a couple weeks ago. I just woke up and I had so many really important decisions to make that day related to professional stuff, relationship stuff. My system was just like, I don't even know where to begin with this, and I'm terrified to start. And I just want to curl up. I want to go back to bed. I want to blank all of this out. And what I find is when that I call it like an existential angst, but it's basically just anxiety when it arises. The moment of arising, like I become it, I blend with it. And now I, again, am like doing life through the lens of being that thing. And again, saying just something like hi, scary feelings. In order to be able to say hi, scary feelings, you have to become the subject to the object of the scary feelings, meaning you have to become the observer of the thing. And now it becomes something that you can interact with. And because it's also so big, the whole day is like, oh, this is going to happen. And it's the same thing with being in the Uber. It's like, this is going to have this implication, all these things that you can't actually control, but the mind is very good at prospecting into the future about. To go, hi, scary feelings. I see you. So you no longer are them. And then ask, what is one next step that I can do right now? And usually that next step, like in that case, is just like, actually nothing. I just sit here. And so you commit to sitting here. And you do that moment by moment by moment. And I think that's a really good, simple strategy. I want to talk about shame because it's really important in the context of the inner critic. And I just want to go back to the inner alignment thing that I opened up around. Agitated mind is often an indication of something where like out of alignment with a certain truth, because I don't think we went enough into that. Like, well, what do I do with that? And the main invitation here for anyone that's like maybe resonating with that is to first just ask yourself, am I willing to go into that territory? Is this the time where I'm actually willing to be more honest with myself around something that might be happening beneath the surface that I'm not aligning with? If you find yourself potentially angry at what I'm saying right now or frustrated, especially around this idea that maybe I've made a bunch of decisions that were out of alignment over the course of years, if there isn't a really strong emotional response to that, it can often be a sign that there's a part of you that's resonating with the truth of it and is terrified if that is actually true. And if it feels too scary to go into it, because I get it, like some of the stuff we're talking about has really big implications. Like, did I build an entire family and a job and like all of this on ground that like wasn't actually aligned to me? And I won't say that that's not necessarily the case. What I will say is that you don't have to blow up your life and you don't actually even know yet. That's more still like an idea running through the mind. Like even just saying like, I did all of this wrong is an idea. It's not actually the soul speaking. Your job in that moment, your scope of responsibility in that moment is just to recommit to what is most true in me right now. And even if the relationship feels off, like there's something off here. Again, what the mind does with that is like, I got to blow this up and I got to leave and I got to start fresh. That's the mind. Right. That's not necessarily the soul's truth. If you take in all the variables that are involved, which is like, I have kids and we're here, and the truth might actually be right now is like, yeah, all of this is happening, but it still feels like the right thing to stay here and to lean into it. And like the next step for me is like, I actually have to have an honest conversation with my partner right now. Mm-hmm. So just be wary of how the mind takes like an intuitive knowing and then creates a whole big ego story about what it means, because that is more to do with your conditioning and your patterns than it is to do with an intuitive guidance.
Sometimes it's hard to see this stuff, Cory. Sometimes it's hard to understand like what it is. You think when you think you're going down the right path. You know, Dominic does this awesome meditation called the Great Mind Meditation, and it's where we get an opportunity to meet that great man, that man inside of us. And after talking to dozens and dozens of guys that have done this, oftentimes that guy that they see is a little bit older. You know, sometimes it's a lot older, sometimes it's not that much older. But there is the thing that comes up most often in the conversation that I've had, certainly came up for me personally, is that when we look at the quality of that great man, he's someone that knows. He's someone that has like really clear direction. And what I hear you saying is really maybe one of the first indicators for how do we start to become that great man that does have knowing, that does have clarity, that does have direction, which is being open to that alignment, being open to those feelings and actually seeing like where those thoughts are at and allowing ourselves to see them without the need for action. And I think that's the part that you're just speaking of. It's that just because I allow myself to see this for what it is, it doesn't mean I need to go action the entire thing and blow up my life. But I love this, being able to take an anxious thought or a box that's just shaking and being able to look at it. Because I know for a large part of my life, and still do this, moving fast, being busy, either mentally or physically, allows me to avoid that altogether. And then I start to ask myself, well, why am I not that great man? Why do I not have clarity for direction? So just giving myself the moment to like sit in it and see it, at least I know that there's direction with no action needed. That's beautiful.
Yeah. And that's a deep form of honesty. Being honest that I don't have the capacity yet to follow this deeper thing is like a beautiful start, and is still like a commitment to aligning with what is true. Because the impulse that's arising might genuinely be like, I don't know. This is big. This feels messy. I feel like I'm stuck in something and I don't know what to do next. You start there. Let the pressure cooker of that awareness and that honesty melt some of the armor and the guarding that's been developed over a lifetime. And as that starts to soften, the truth has the resonance of not being a decision. It doesn't feel like you're wrestling with this or like, now I'm just going to go in and do this. It's more of a receiving. And often the receiving is like, I don't know yet. It's like permission to wait, permission to not know. And if somebody wants to navigate this, I mean, it's helpful to just like go on a walk or to get still and just ask yourself, like, what truth is arising in me that feels too scary to follow? And just start there and see if you can allow yourself to even name what that is or to feel what that is. And notice the jolt that shows up through your body and like the tension that arises in your chest. You're not going to die. And it doesn't mean you have to destroy your life. It's just like, I am coming back into myself and starting to have an honest conversation with myself. It's why the spiritual journey, and when I say the spiritual journey, all I mean by that is how we find freedom within human form. It's why that is a hard process. I don't know anyone who's walked this path, any personal growth path, that has not had to confront demons, pains, or decisions that they've made that it's just like, that has led to this. It's okay.
Cory, do you have an example in your life where you felt out of alignment and that box was buzzing and then you decided to pay attention to it? Because I'm curious, like, what happened then, right? Like, did you do something? Did that box stop buzzing? Is there a different box now? I think this is maybe a second way to ask the first question I had. I'm so curious about that, going through that process.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of, you could call like more benign examples related to my work. My dad, he was one of the people who like encouraged me to start following mindfulness and positive psychology. He was a physician. He was getting interested in these other evidence-based modalities. But he still has like more of an anxious disposition and more of like a protective disposition over his children, and like wanted to make sure that I was going to be okay following this path. Like it was new, like, can you even make money doing this? And what he was seeing that like it was happening in healthcare, they were bringing in mindfulness people. It's like, that's where the money is. You can maybe make a job, a career doing it through that lens. So a lot of my early days was oriented around like trying to do work at hospitals and taking a health-based orientation. And I did that for a while. I almost even considered getting an MD. So because it seemed like, wow, that would like, and I had a business background. So I was like, what do I have to do that? That train of thought didn't last for too long, but it was like a serious inquiry. Something in me was like, this doesn't feel like it. Like I'm not feeling lit up by this. The terrifying thing was like what I did feel more lit up by had more of like a broke philosophy type person energy to it. It was just like, I just want to understand all facets of happiness. Like I would love to like study that and work with people on that and not be limited to just mindfulness or like healthcare. I don't want to go to hospitals. Like I think I want to run groups. But there wasn't really a model that I had for what that could look like. But I do remember just like very clearly seeing that like I had to differentiate a bit from like my dad's influence. And it wasn't like hardcore, like dad, I was still living at home, but it was like internally, it was just like, I'm going to do what I need to do here to make him feel okay and for me to make some money, but also I'm going to trust that what's alive is worth following. And I did.
And we're really glad you did, Cory, because you're touching the lives of so many people. And I know how well you're doing in terms of your reach and the impact. And so many of the people in our community have followed your work. And I've had conversations with them and their lives have been changed. So it just goes to show you like that path that you found because you listened to a deeper part of yourself. Even at that time, it looked like a broke person's path, like you said, but you walked it anyway. And you're not broke, you're doing fine, and you're also impacting lives. It just lends additional credibility to everything that you're saying. I also know that we only have a couple of minutes left here, and I know you wanted to hit this topic of shame. I know you kind of started into it, but I do want to leave a little bit of space there because, like, why wouldn't you end any conversation with, a shame cherry on top? Yeah. So what do you got with respect to shame?
Yeah. So we'll put it through the lens of like the inner critic, where the thoughts that come up of like, I'm an idiot. What's wrong with me? Why did I say that thing to this person? I look like a fool. Where a lot of people, the bucket they put that in is like a pathology of mind. Like I'm a negative person. And it's really much deeper than that and actually much more positive than that. So why does the inner critic, what's the evolutionary foundation of the inner critic and even shame? It's a survival function. It is to ensure that we stay connected to the tribe. If we do something that goes against the general narrative of some like our tribe that could potentially cause us to feel ostracized, what do we feel? We feel this feeling of shame of like, oh, there's something wrong with me. How does that show up now with thoughts? It shows up as those thoughts as well. Like there's something wrong with me. I'm an idiot. I can't get anything right. And what does that do? It basically bullies you back into connection and doing what needs to be done in order to be accepted by the general narrative or those that are going to keep you alive and safe. And historically, that was essential. That was a form of survival. You wouldn't be able to make it on your own. These days, it's different. We are still deeply interconnected with others, and well-being is deeply tied to our social relationships, but it's not the same in terms of absolute survival. And yet we still have that conditioning, which, how does that show up? We're flirting with someone in the coffee shop, then we say something dumb, and then we're just like, oh my God, I'm such an idiot. What is wrong with me? And you just spend the next 12 hours ruminating about it. Yep. And so I think just understanding the evolutionary foundation of it is really helpful. And it allows you to then communicate to yourself as if you're communicating to that part that's to make you feel safe and protected and connected. And that's where you can come in with that mantra of like, of course, like, hey, yeah, I know. Of course, like, of course you're scared. Of course you feel like you messed up. Like you want to connect. You don't want to be left out. You don't want people to not like you. And just being able to acknowledge that softens the whole system. It takes it from that being the driving force to just like an experience moving through your awareness. And I have found just having that understanding of the inner critic and shame is really useful for not compounding the suffering that often arises from it, which usually takes the form of like going more into the thoughts of like, what's wrong with me? Why do I have such a negative mind? And why am I beating myself up over this? Like the thing that we're all familiar with. So just recognize it as like a form of love from yourself, a misguided form of love that you can come in now as the adult self and say, hey, yeah, I know it's scary. Don't worry. We're okay. We're safe. And it's just like, what's one step we could take right now?
Cory, this was awesome, man. Thank you for initiating this discussion on how to work with your thoughts. I know that given what I'm going through, this is a really timely conversation. And I've already picked up a few nuggets, particularly like that 2-word mantra for anytime my mind's freaking out, which is, of course, of course. It just feels so like the first time you said it, my nervous system started to relax. Could feel it was just kind of compassionate way of meeting that moment. So thank you for that. I know that this is only scratching the surface on the work that you do around thoughts. And you have, like we said at the beginning, the most popular masterclass that you've run, which is working with thoughts. You've generously offered to make available to our community for 50% off. How are they going to be able to get that?
Yeah, we'll do a link in the show notes. And if you want to go directly to it, it's just corymuscara.com/thoughts. And there'll be a coupon code option. We were going to do Great Man, but I think that could get complicated. So let's just do MAN, MAN, all lowercase. And you just put that in. It's usually $50. You get it for $25. And we really go in depth into working with thoughts in that class.
I'll put that at the top of the show notes. And then I know that some of the people, including myself, who are in your community, love to get the daily text messages that you send out, these little pearls of wisdom around like bite-sized doses of mindfulness. So what would you have to say about like the text messages? And I'll also link that in the show notes, but how do we get on that list?
Yeah. For those who are interested, sending daily messages on mindfulness, mental health, well-being. It's supposed to be like a little daily shower for your mind. And you could get those you could text both words, Great Man, to 1-631-305-2874. If you just text Great Man to that number, you'll automatically be put in. It's free. You can unsubscribe at any point in time, and would love to see you there.
Cool. I'll have all those details in the show notes. And that phone number one more time, Cory?
631-305-2874.
Beautiful. Thanks a lot, Cory. Hey, final reminder, if you love this conversation on working with thoughts and you want to dive deeper into Cory's 90-minute masterclass on working with thoughts, we've offered you a 50% off discount code, which the link is at the top of the show notes, and you can access that now. And if you want to hear from Cory, daily basis on some mindfulness techniques, meditation tips, every day free in your inbox or your text message inbox, the link there, his phone number, and how to get access to those is right there at the top of the show notes. Unfortunately, it's only available right now to, I believe, North American residents. Anyone outside the US, that service is not quite available just yet. But for those of you who are here and have access to it, that link is at the top of the show notes.